Hello my friends and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to be talking about the 10 most fun builds that I have played in Baldur's Gate 3. Since this game launched, I've played hundreds of builds and tested hundreds more, and so today I wanted to talk about 10 of the builds I found to be the absolute most fun to play. So if you're newer to the game and looking for an extremely fun playthrough, or a veteran looking to try something new, these builds are builds that I love, and maybe you will too. Now obviously fun is subjective. What I find fun might not be what you find fun, and that's totally okay, but some of these builds are very likely to be ones you'll enjoy. I've included very different playstyles, and talking about fun builds can also help give you ideas for things that you might enjoy, or find the fun in places that you previously hadn't. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Josh Hobbs for the $5 donation, Akeon for the $5, Wanda Husbando for the £5, Thomas Beam for the super generous $50, and Courtney and Levant Kurt for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate your support. It really means so much to me. Alright, let's have the most fun. Now, before I jump into the builds, I think it's important that I talk about what I mean when I say something is fun. People have fun in different ways, and that's, of course, totally okay. I'm not here to tell you that you are having fun wrong, and in fact, if anyone tries to tell you that the way you have fun in a single-player video game is incorrect, the only thing that that tells you is that they're a sad and small-minded person, and their opinion isn't worth anything. For me, what is most fun in Baldur's Gate 3 is the most interesting and engaging gameplay. Now that sounds like it's kind of tautological. Of course, most fun is most interesting. But what that means for me is that I want to have high agency and make decisions, and I want to vary what I'm doing. In particular, I want varied gameplay, both over the course of a build's levels, and from turn to turn. So I want my decisions to feel impactful, I want to feel like I am changing what I'm doing turn over turn, and I want the class often to be an interesting and involved character build as well, so that I can make decisions in terms of items and build gear. I don't prefer builds that just do the same thing every turn over and over again, and I don't prefer builds where you don't make a lot of decisions during combat, so I'm gonna prefer builds that are varied, both in terms of their gameplay and over the course of their levels. I also tend to like builds that make a lot of decisions, and what that means is that I want builds where my good decisions give me an advantage, and my bad decisions give me a disadvantage. In other words, I want to feel like I'm impacting the game. There are some builds where you go into a fight, you roll your dice, if you roll high you win, if you roll low you lose. And often those can be the most powerful builds because they tend to be just direct, overpowering damage. But for me, that's less interesting than a build where I have to make a lot of decisions. And finally, I do want a build that's powerful, but not broken. I don't want to feel like I'm fighting my build, so I want a build that does what it's supposed to do and does it well, but I also don't want to completely trivialize encounters, so I want my builds to be on a sort of 7 out of 10 power scale in order for me to have the most fun. So that gives you an idea of what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a build, and obviously you can adjust my opinions based on what you think you're looking for. Let's start with a quick honorable mention. Monoclass characters. So obviously I like multi-classing and I like complicated and interesting builds, otherwise I wouldn't be running a build YouTube channel. But monoclass characters are really fun in Baldur's Gate. It's worth keeping in mind that the game was mostly built and tested and balanced, assuming that players would be using almost entirely or entirely monoclass characters. So if you're looking to play the game the way the designers really intended for you to play it, and to have the encounters be balanced the way they intended for them to be balanced, monoclass builds are just going to work out really well in general. For the most part, there are very, very few traps. All monoclass characters can be fun and very, very playable. You're going to get the intended balance, the intended gameplay. You won't have to make any super complicated decisions. So if you're looking for a simpler build, and if you're looking for something that's reliable and doesn't have a chance of blowing itself up if you pick the wrong level order or something like that, monoclass characters are always going to be great. Obviously, you should avoid playing monoclass characters if you prefer to heavily customize your builds. And if you want to break the game or you want to make the game super hard for yourself, you should avoid monoclass characters because they will tend to be a more balanced experience. But it's worth mentioning that the basic mechanics of Baldur's Gate 3 are a ton of fun, and just playing the game normally is going to be really, really fun, so pick a class you like and enjoy it. And jumping into the actual builds, coming in at number 10, the Glaivemaster Fighter. This is a build built around the combination of Polearm Master, the feat, and Sentinel. What that means is that when an enemy approaches you, Polearm Master gives you an opportunity attack against that enemy, and then Sentinel stops them dead because whenever they get hit by an opportunity attack, they stop moving. So when your enemies walk towards you, you get to hit them because you're using a reach weapon. It's outside of their normal melee range, and they get stuck, motionless, unable to hit you. Not only is this just really funny, it's also extremely effective against melee enemies. And you can combine that with even more lockdown by using Battlemaster Fighter for the various lockdown abilities of Battlemaster Fighter, and Swashbuckler Rogue, which is the way that I enjoy building the character the most, to use Swashbuckler Rogue's lockdown abilities as well. And this gives you a character that has an enormous number of options, despite being a melee character. A lot of the builds with the most options every turn are spellcasters, but the Glaivemaster Fighter has a ton of different things that you can do every single turn, which makes it extremely engaging and very powerful to play. You can build this with 8 levels of Fighter, 4 levels of Rogue, 12 levels of Fighter, or Fighter 8 Barbarian level, and I've done builds with all of them. By the way, also, if any of these builds intrigue you and you want to learn more, I'll link the full build guides in the descriptions below. You should play a character like this if you want to play a melee character and you enjoy having really high damage, because this is a fighter build, so it's going to have excellent damage. Lockdown that stops enemies from doing stuff. If you like doing stuff off of your turn and stopping enemies from acting on their turns, so enemies will often have their plans disrupted by this character. And if you really like having your positioning and your decisions matter, where you stand on the battlefield with this character matters a lot, because enemies moving through your space are going to be stopped and unable to keep acting. So positioning yourself where enemies will have to pass through you to get to your allies is a really interesting tactical puzzle. Moving this character to shut down priority targets is always something that's going to be really engaging. It also causes really, really funny things to happen all the time, where an enemy will be charging at your really low health character. You'll kind of have forgotten that you have the Polearm Master Fighter, and then they'll just get stopped in their tracks and just be staring at your wizard with 4 HP left, fuming impotently. Or they'll skip their turns in various ways. You will kill enemies on their turn a lot of the time as well, which is always hilarious when it happens. You shouldn't play this character if you dislike having pop-up messages when it's not your turn. A lot of players find that a little bit annoying, and you do have to decide when you're making your opportunity attacks. This character generates a lot of those, so be aware of that. And you need to position yourself well in order to maximize this character. So if you don't like carefully positioning your characters, this is probably not the character for you. It also has specific gear requirements, though depending on the build, you can build it differently, but you're always going to need a polearm in order to make the Polearm Master feat function. So if you have something else in mind for your fighter, then obviously the polearm character is not going to be the one that you want. I think that this is also just a really strong character if you're newer to the game, because it teaches you a lot of the game mechanics and ways that you can get the most out of it, while also being an extremely forgiving and very, very powerful character, and one that's so disruptive and has so many decisions attached to it that it's going to be extremely fun to play. Coming in at number 9, this is kind of the inspiration for this list, the Punt Wizard. There's definitely some recency bias here, because this is one of the characters I built most recently, but honestly, this character is so much fun. It's the most fun I've had building or testing characters in a really long time playing in Baldur's Gate, because it plays so differently and so uniquely, and is also so cool that it uses a multi-class combination that you almost never see. The Punch Wizard uses Monk and Bladesinger Wizard to make an extremely mobile, extremely high damage character that uses spellcasting and weapon attacks and unarmed attacks to eliminate specific enemies, zip across the battlefield, and take enemies out with a flurry of punches, stabs, and spells. It's unique in that this is a very rare multi-class combination, which I think is cool in and of itself, and it also plays very differently than most other characters. I think it makes a great stand-in for like an anime protagonist, or for a Volstrucker from the Critical Role cartoon. Somebody mentioned that in the build guide for this character. And it's just so much fun because those are archetypes that you usually don't see in Baldur's Gate 3. I honestly think this build is fun enough that if I made this list a month from now, it might have climbed further up the list, but I wanted to lowball it because I built it fairly recently, so I haven't played it as much as the other builds on this list. You should try this build out if you like characters that have really good damage, really good mobility, and lockdown, because you have all of your monk abilities to knock enemies over, you have the incredible lockdown abilities that are available to wizards, especially with things like Booming Blade, and you do amazing damage. You can vary your attacks from turn to turn. Where you stand on the battlefield matters a lot because you need to make sure that you are in range to kill enemies but get out of range of their retaliation, because the character is pretty squishy, so you need to make certain that you have positioned it appropriately. But you also have great defensive tools, so if you do mess up, you have lots of ways to recover. And I think that that's one of the really fun things about this character, is it gives you a lot of tools to do well, and a lot of tools to recover if you've done badly, while also the core gameplay just being so much fun and so varied and interesting that you're always going to have something cool to do. You also get a ton of control. You can stop key enemies from doing anything. You should avoid playing this character, though, if you dislike playing squishier characters or ones that have specific defensive requirements. If a random critical hit knocking your character down will ruin your day, this might not be the character that you want. You should also avoid if you prefer not to trivialize boss encounters, because this character as a monk has Stunning Strike and can definitely make boss encounters too easy. Or if you really dislike it when your mistakes are costly. I personally like it where if I make a mistake, it actually hurts me significantly, and I don't mind losing an honor mode run if I mess up my strategy. But if you prefer not to have that be something that can happen to you, then this is probably not the build for you. Although it is very, very powerful, especially on the top end, especially if you're a more experienced player. But messing up can hurt. And it does require some resource management because you're managing key points, you're managing spell slots, you're managing blade song charges. So there's definitely some things to keep track of. I love this build for more experienced players, and you will definitely still be able to enjoy it quite a bit if you're a newer player, but you will probably get the most out of it once you're a little more familiar with BG3's system, so just be aware of that. But overall, this is the build that I really want from a monk, just dashing across the battlefield at lightning speed, taking out key targets, assassinating things, teleporting, punching enemies through walls. It just gives you so many options and you feel so cool while you're doing them. Coming in at number 8, a classic build on this channel, the Lightning Lord. This build uses Tempest Cleric, Divination Wizard, and Sorcerer with Quicken Spell Meta Magic in order to cast a one-shot combo. You use Witch Bolt, you target an enemy, you get an automatic critical hit, you maximize the damage on a wet enemy, and you just do a guaranteed 300 damage in one blast to one-shot them. Now, that's an extremely powerful tool, and that type of one-shot combo is really, really fun. But what makes this build much more fun than just being a one-shot combo build is that you're also one of the best spell-casting characters in the game. You have amazing support, you have tons of varied options, with clerics supporting spells, the full wizard spell list available from scrolls, and sorcerer's meta magic to give you just a tremendous number of tools, in addition to the ability to just point and click at an enemy that you find annoying and erase them from existence. This is the most powerful build that made this top 10 fun builds list. It's one of the top 10 most powerful builds in the game as well, I think. But even though it is extremely high power, one of the things that makes this build so much fun is that you can apply that power when you want it and do other things when you don't. This build can also take a back seat and do things like cast Twin Haste on 2 allies, or cast Sanctuary and Haste, or use control spells like Sleet Storm or Fear or whatever in order to lock down encounters. So you always have tons of options and are not reduced to just the only thing you do being one-shotting bosses. But also, if you just want to look at a boss and say, you're gone, you're out of here, you can do that as well. So you should play this character if you enjoy one-shotting enemies, if you enjoy cool build combos, because this uses some of the game's mechanics and some in ways that by now are fairly well known, but are still a fairly intricate puzzle to put together in order to create this build and have it be functional. If you like having awesome support abilities, but also getting to take the front, take the star position sometimes, is especially good in co-op, where you can kind of take a backseat to your co-op partners, let them feel like they're doing all the work for you. But then when you really just want a boss gone, you just obliterate it and win the encounter immediately. This is also just overall one of the strongest spellcasters in the game. So if you want high-powered spellcasting, this character has access to pretty much everything that's good about a spellcaster and can make it even stronger with Sorcerer metamagic. You also have great defensive capabilities because you have heavy armor from Tempest Cleric, as well as the shield spell and a bunch of other defensive tools, so it's hard for you to actually die, and you can keep up all of your buffs or control spells or your one-shot combo relatively easily. You should avoid this character if you dislike following a very specific level order. In order to build this character correctly, you do need to follow an exact level order, which you can, of course, find in the build guide that I've linked below. And if you don't want to make the game too easy. This is one of the very strongest builds in the game, so while I enjoy it because it lets you kind of decide whether you're going to use all of its power at once or not, you can definitely make the game too easy for yourself by playing a build this strong. And of course, there's also resource management. Not only are you managing spell slots, you're also managing things like short rest abilities like Tempest Cleric's Channel Divinity, Sorcerer's Metamagic points, item cooldowns, and so on. So there's definitely a little bit more to keep track of, but the floor on this character is so high that honestly, even if you mess up your resource management, it's not going to hurt you significantly. It just means that you'll be doing something else for that fight, and that something else is going to be being just a better full-powered wizard, so that's still a really good thing to be. I think that this build, of all of the strongest builds in the game, is especially fun because it just gives you so many choices while also bringing the incredible power level that you want from such a high-powered build. At number 7, the Tiger Heart Barbarian. This Barbarian uses Tiger Heart in order to turn all of your attacks while raging into an AoE cone that inflicts bleed on every enemy that you hit. At level 6, you get the Wolverine aspect, which causes enemies to become maimed whenever they're bleeding, which prevents them from moving. So every one of your attacks is an area of effect that causes enemies to become, to start bleeding and be unable to move. This by itself is really fun because it prevents them from getting away from your Barbarian, so that's a really cool combo. But where this becomes especially good is if you combine it with ways to knock enemies prone. In particular, ways to inflict reverberation, like the Boots of Stormy Clamor, will knock enemies prone. In Baldur's Gate 3, it takes enemy movement, half of their movement, in order to stand back up. And if they can't move, they can't stand back up. So an enemy who's prone and maimed is completely stunned, unable to react. So basically every single attack that you make with a Tiger Barbarian is an AoE stun while you're raging. This is really powerful, but also extremely fun, because it lets you, when you can group enemies up, have some of the most absurd turns that any character is capable of. Locking down or soloing entire encounters, stunning them, outputting great damage, and of course you're a Wild Heart Barbarian, so you're extremely tanky as well. Some of the most ridiculous turns that I've ever had in Baldur's Gate 3 have been as a result of a Wild Heart Barbarian using Action Surge with levels of Fighter in order to just AoE down an entire encounter at once. You can put enemies together using things like Minor Illusion or the Black Hole Illithid power in order to group them on top of each other, and then use this Tiger Barbarian attack in order to AoE down the whole encounter So you just get some of the most ridiculous turns possible in the game. This character obviously does great damage. It's a barbarian, so you get to use some of the best weapons in the game. You rarely miss your attacks because you have reckless attack. You're great at tanking because, again, you're a barbarian. You have lots of hit points, and you can cause enemies to attack you with reckless attack. You have great lockdown. Enemies who are susceptible to bleeding basically can't fight back against this character. You get some of the most ridiculous turns in the game, and you get the solo encounters entirely on your own when you're playing a tiger barbarian. This is really the power fantasy for playing a barbarian, I think, just wading into combat and emerging from the other side in a blood-soaked pile of bodies that you have left behind you because of your unquenchable rage as you move like a whirlwind through the enemy formation. The downsides of this character are that you do the same thing most fights. You're a barbarian and you make melee attacks, and that's what you're going to be doing. So if you are not looking for a character that just wants to get into melee and fight in melee, then this obviously isn't the character for you. And you do have to manage your rage, which is a long rest resource. Also, if you spend a turn where you don't take or deal damage, then take damage or make an attack, then you lose rage, and that can be frustrating for some players, so those are some things to be aware of. But if you just want an extremely satisfying, extremely powerful, and devastatingly dangerous melee combatant, it's hard to go wrong with a Tigerheart Barbarian. Coming in at number 6, Beastmaster Ranger. So Beastmaster Ranger is a class that's always been kind of funny. It has really never found its identity in tabletop D&D. They've had to rework it several times. And then in order to implement it in Baldur's Gate 3, Larian basically rebuilt this class from the ground up, adding a ton of abilities that it doesn't have in tabletop. And they did a phenomenal job. Beastmaster Ranger is so cool because it really feels like you and your animal companion are operating as a duo, working together in order to take down enemies and support one another and do various things. The ways that you can play the characters and the different animal companions that you can use all play out extremely differently. And you can also change which animal companion you're using over the course of the playthrough. If you want to resummon a different animal companion for different encounters, that's a totally viable thing to do and lets you change up what you're doing with your Beastmaster Ranger a lot, which is great, especially for a mostly martial character that normally doesn't change that much over the course of the 12 levels. Beastmaster Ranger, thanks to getting access to different animal companions and having them gain new and cool abilities at various levels as you keep leveling up, changes a lot over the course of the playthrough. Obviously, you should only play this character if you want to have 2 characters for the price of 1, but you do get 2 characters for the price of 1, which is a really fun thing to get for a character build. And you have tons of options as to how you structure your character, which animal companion you use, whether you use the same one all the way through or change it. Also drastically changes the character of the playthrough, so it gives you a lot of customization there. It's a very consistent character. The Beastmaster Ranger, because it's a ranger, which is one of the most straightforward and consistent builds in the game, just Ranger 12 just always works, but it adds this whole extra thing for you to manage in the form of your animal companion. It gives you both consistency and variability in the same class, which is something that very few other classes manage, and that's really cool. There's also a ton of weird interactions between the animal abilities. They get some unique abilities that don't appear anywhere else in the game, and you can do some really weird things with Beastmaster Ranger abilities, like infinite darkness or various other things that are just cool tricks that aren't available anywhere else in Baldur's Gate 3, and only Beastmaster Rangers get to do them. Obviously, you should avoid this character if you don't want to manage a summon. If you prefer to have only one character, then the summoning character is not the one that you should play. And while you can play melee Beastmaster, Archer Beastmaster is a lot stronger. So usually you're going to want to build it as an Archer if you're playing this character. And if you're not interested in playing an Archer, then Beastmaster may not be what you want, though melee Beastmaster is still viable, just a little bit less powerful. This character also does have positioning requirements, because the beast is pretty squishy and can be in a lot of danger, especially if you don't have party members who are good at supporting it and keeping it alive. It does require a little bit more play skill from the player than a lot of other martial characters, which can often just run in a straight line at enemies. But if you don't mind any of those things, then this character is going to be extremely rewarding, extremely fun to play, and can play out in a lot of different ways. Next up, my favorite support character now, the Glamour Bard support. This character uses 10 levels of Glamour Bard and usually 2 levels of Star Druid, though you can also just go Glamour Bard as a monoclass character or add some Sorcerer levels or Wizard levels if you want additional types of spell casting. Playing a pure support character like this, I think, is really fun because it tends to make combats go longer, but without costing you power level, so you make a lot more decisions and can see a lot more of the game while not putting yourself at significantly greater risk. And it also lets you overcome encounters in ways that you may not have been thinking of if your normal approach is just to damage everything until it's dead on the first turn. Playing a pure support character can help break you out of that pattern and get to see more of what the game has to offer and more of what the enemies do. Not that it's bad to just kill everything on the first turn, of course. If that's how you like to play, that can be great, but you will often see the advice that is the only way to play, and that's extremely not true. This character is amazing because it provides some of the most pure support. You can play this as a pure pacifist character if you want, doing actually no damage or even no hostile effects to enemies and still have it be incredibly effective, which is a really fun and unique way to play a character as well. Or you can have it be more aggressive, but still providing a huge amount of support to your party. This character also has some of the most complex movement and weirdest interactions in the game. So if you're a more veteran player looking for interesting tactical challenges, this character creates them because you're doing a lot of deliberate provoking of attacks of opportunity in order to trigger the Mantle of Inspiration charm with the Glamour Bard. And then you will, and also trying to manipulate enemy aggro in order to keep them from breaking your concentration on Mantle of Majesty. You also get all of the cool stuff that Bard already gets with their various control spells. The fact that they're a Bard, which gives you amazing skill access, of course, and all the other things as well. So this just has some really complex and interesting gameplay and makes the game more strategic than it often is if you're playing characters that mostly front load damage. You also, of course, get really powerful spell casting and a very varied strategy from encounter to encounter. You get to shut down bosses with Mantle of Majesty or play these intricate positioning games where you try to charm enemies in order to cost them turns because they're going to be losing the ability to attack one of your characters, and knowing how far enemies move can give you a lot of advantages if you know how to position. This also has the advantage that there are some people who Glamour Bard absolutely drives berserk because it's not a pure damage character. So weird nerds who spend too much time on Reddit and just parrot back opinions that they hear there will get really mad if you play a Glamour Bard, and I personally find that very rewarding. But you should be aware for playing this character that it is a pure support character. It does low or no damage. It has a lot of positioning requirements, and so generally it's intended for more veteran players, this build. But once you start learning the intricacies of the game, it's incredibly rewarding. You also should generally play it with at least one and preferably two melee teammates, so if you are playing a party where you're not mostly melee characters or have no melee characters, then you probably shouldn't include this build, because it benefits heavily from having melee teammates. But if those aren't things that bother you, this is one of the most strategically difficult and therefore, in my opinion, strategically interesting characters, while still being extremely powerful in the entire game. Coming in at number 4, the Lich Queen, which I've also called the real best wizard in Baldur's Gate 3. Basically, this is a cleric that's also a wizard, or a wizard that's also a cleric. Thanks to the way that wizard spellcasting works in Baldur's Gate 3, the spell level that you can learn from scrolls is based on your total caster level, not your total wizard level. So a cleric with 11 levels of cleric and 1 level of wizard gets 6th level cleric spells and up to 6th level wizard spells available from scrolls. So you basically get to be 2 characters all wrapped up into one. In particular, I enjoy this version with Death Cleric that can really focus on dealing damage while also having all of this amazing spellcasting, but you can also build it with Tempest Cleric, with Light Cleric. It doesn't really matter what cleric subclass you're using, but there are various ways to do it. But the way that this character works, you basically get to be two entire spellcasters wrapped into a single character. You have some of the very best spellcasting in the game. Obviously, wizards and clerics together have the best damage spells, the best control spells, the best defensive spells, the best support spells, and you get them all on a single character because of the way that wizard spellscribing works. This is really the ultimate spellcaster in Baldur's Gate. If you just want to be the master of magic, then this character is very hard to go wrong with. The only real downside is that there is some resource management, obviously, like any spellcaster, but more so because your spell preparations as a wizard can be somewhat limited since you only have one actual wizard level. You may also end up using the Headband of Intellect because in order to avoid having to put actual points in intelligence, so there may be some gear requirements. And the wizard spell scribing thing is arguably an exploit or a glitch. In tabletop, it wouldn't give you max level wizard spells if you just have one level of wizard. That's kind of unique to Baldur's Gate 3. Obviously, that's so baked into the system at this point that it's never going to change and is clearly how the designers intended it for it to work. But if you believe that that's an exploit, you may not want to use it. But other than those, this is just the strongest, most consistent, and one of the most fun spellcasters in the game as just a pure spellcaster. Coming in at number 3, my favorite Patch 8 edition, Swashbuckler Rogue. Swashbuckler Rogue is the way that Rogue should be. You feel tricky, you feel clever, you feel like you're unpredictable to your enemies, which obviously are computers, so that's not real, but it gives you the sense that you are doing things that your opponents don't expect. Swashbuckler Rogue is a relatively simple class, but that simplicity is deceptive because you always have tons of options every single turn because the way that the character's abilities interact, especially with the items and weapon abilities and everything available in the game, just gives you an enormous list of different, relevant, and cool things that you can do every single turn. Whether you're playing a monoclass Swashbuckler Rogue or just a heavily rogue-oriented multi-class like Rogue 10 Fighter 2 or Rogue 11 with a level of Hexblade to make things more charisma-based for the character, you're going to be able to get a lot of different feats, so you can use some of the cool feat combos in the game. Sentinel and Polearm Master I've already talked about in the Glaivemaster build, but Sentinel is especially fun for this character, and because you get 4 feats as a rogue if you're monoclass, you can engage with a lot of the feats that normally you don't get to see, especially because this character gets a natural initiative bonus, so you just get to play with more different things that aren't available to other characters. This character rewards tricky maneuvering, it rewards knowing what options you have against certain enemies, and it gives you a lot of strategy and agency every turn. There's always something cool that you can do, always something fun that you can do, and if you mess up, you can always get away and come back and try again later, which gives you even more the feeling of being a rogue and hitting enemies when they're weak or hitting them where it hurts. This character has so many options, even with the few abilities that you get, that I think it's just a really elegant design. You have tons of lockdown, and you can vary what crowd control abilities you're using on which enemies in order to make sure that the enemies are maximally inconvenienced by them. And because you're so mobile, you can always do it to the enemy that you want to attack or inconvenience. You also do great damage, though it is lower than other dedicated martial damage builds, but for me, I enjoy that a lot because it means, again, that encounters tend to go a little bit longer because you're playing a lower damage character, but with all these cool tricks and defensive abilities, which lets you do more fun things while you're playing the game. You should avoid playing Swashbuckler Rogues if you dislike characters that are lower on the power scale. Not low, this is still a very strong character that's more than powerful enough to defeat Honor Mode, but not as powerful as some of the other builds that I've mentioned. Monoclass Rogue is generally considered the weakest monoclass character, but Swashbuckler Rogue does kind of change that by adding a bunch of power level to Rogue, so it's still a very powerful monoclass character. And you also are a little bit squishy or have low hit points. You do have great defensive capabilities with all of Rogue's evasion and uncanny dodge and everything, but there are ways that this character can just get blown up, so again, that's a downside you have to be aware of. And this character also, again, requires more strategy, more positioning than some other builds, so be aware of that. If that's not something you're looking for, this may not be the character for you. But if you like making lots of decisions every turn and feeling like all of your decisions matter, Swashbuckler Rogue is just one of the most fun characters that gives you that feeling the most possible. Coming in at number 2, a controversial character, Wild Magic Sorcerer. Now, I mentioned right at the beginning that one of my favorite things in games is when things go wrong and force me to adapt my strategy on the fly. Wild Magic Sorcerer is basically things go wrong the class. But what makes this character fun instead of just frustrating is that because it's a sorcerer and therefore incredibly powerful, it can create these bizarre and difficult situations that you weren't expecting, but you also have the tools and power to get yourself back out of them. Wild Magic Sorcerer gives you the tremendous and awesome power of a sorcerer, so when something ridiculous happens, you can still recover, and I find that that is the most satisfying strategic moment in games, is when I have to adapt on the fly, but am able to find a way to do that, and Wild Magic Sorcerer creates both conditions for that thing to happen. You should play Wild Magic Sorcerers if you like randomness, and randomness is less optimal. You're going to win less often if you're playing a character that has a lot of randomness to it, but will create more emotional swings. You're going to get more dramatic gameplay and more interesting gameplay when things can be more random and therefore more difficult a lot of the time. And it's also worth noting that the randomness for Wild Magic Sorcerer is a little overstated. There are people who will say that this character is unplayable on Honor Mode because of the randomness. That's definitely not true. There are lots of ways that you can mitigate the randomness in your favor or arrange to always have ways to plan for it. And that type of planning ahead, I also find really fun in strategy games. It's also, of course, a charisma character, so you get to do all the dialogue skills. That is also really fun. So there's a lot of things that this character brings to the table. What it really brings, though, is a sense of drama. Something that video games can often be missing is that in other forms of art, in TV, in books, whatever, often the source of drama is the main characters making a mistake or a bad decision happening, and then having to dig themselves back out of it. That doesn't happen as much in games because it puts the player in charge of those decisions. So Wild Magic Sorcerer gives you a sense of, I caused this problem and now I have to solve it, which is one of the main sources of drama that exists in art in general. And being able to experience that in a game that doesn't normally have it, I think is great. You should play this character if you like random things happening, if you like absurd and ridiculous situations, if you enjoy funny things occurring, especially if you're playing in a co-op game and you want to watch your co-op partners just dissolve into laughter because the most ridiculous possible thing happened at the most ridiculous possible time. And also, if you like playing really powerful characters, this is a sorcerer, so you have action economy breaking with meta magic, you have incredible damage, you have incredible control spells, and you have the ability to react on the fly to the things that happen, which the character also causes you to do. Obviously, you shouldn't play a Wild Magic Sorcerer if you dislike randomness, and if you dislike having to react on the fly to strategic situations, if you prefer to plan out your encounter from the beginning. If your satisfaction with playing a game is coming up with a perfect plan and then executing that plan perfectly and not having anything go wrong, then this is not the character for you. But if you like having to adapt your plans on the fly, Wild Magic Sorcerer is incredibly fun because of the randomness that it gives you. And finally, coming in at number 1, the Omnicaster. So I admit that there's a lot of bias here because I just love lore bards. I think that lore bards are incredibly cool. I think it's one of the best design classes in 5th edition. And this is also basically the build that I played through the game the first time with, so there's definitely some nostalgia at play here. But I also think that if you're just looking for the most fun way to play the most of Baldur's Gate possible, this character is incredible for that. The thing that this character lets you do is everything. As a bard, you have access to amazing skills, and as a lore bard, you have even more access to amazing skills. And because you are a full spellcaster, you get to use pretty much all of the spellcasting. You also, because of a cleric level, get access to all of cleric's supporting spells as well, and with a wizard level, get access to every wizard spell that you can scribe from a scroll. With magical secrets, you can even mix in spells from other classes like Paladin or Warlock in order to basically have every good spell in the game all on a single character. And that is both really cool, the fact that that's possible, and also super fun. In addition to having every good spell, you can build this character to do more melee effects. You can build them tankier and move them into melee. You can also have them play more as a ranged character. There are ways you can work some martial stuff into this character as well, but basically you just get to do everything with a single character because you're the best skill user in the game and one of the best spellcasters in the game. And because you're a lore bard with access to counterspell from magical secrets, with access to shields from being a wizard, and with access to cutting words, you get some of the best off-turn actions as well. If you want to be a light cleric, you can also use Warding Flare. So this character can use some of the most disruptive and most fun off-turn actions available in Baldur's Gate. I always like being able to act on enemy turns because it really gives you the feeling of control and the feeling like you're able to affect what's going on in the game. And obviously, one of the themes of all the characters that I've mentioned here is that they give you a lot of agency and a lot of feeling like you can change what's happening. And this character does that better than pretty much every other character. This character also just lets you experience a lot of what Baldur's Gate has to offer all in a single playthrough. And the game is great. So being able to see more of it with one character is just going to be a lot of fun because you just get to do everything. So if you like having skills, if you like being a party leader, if you like having access to every spell in the game, if you like having an absurd number of options every single turn, there's never a turn where you don't have something cool and relevant and interesting and powerful to do because you basically have every spell in the game. So of course you're always going to have something great to do. And if you like being able to act off of your own turn to disrupt enemy plans and shut down what enemies are doing and support your allies even further, I think it's very hard to go wrong with this character. And as a lore bard, you just get all of the most fun access to skills and storylines and out of combat utility as well available. You should avoid this character if you dislike having lower direct damage than other characters. If you really want your character to have the most damage possible, that's not this one. And you do need more game knowledge in order to maximize the use of this character, of course, because you need to know what wizard spells are good, what order to take these levels in, and so on, though obviously I cover that in the guide that I will link to below. Also, it does have the same wizard spell scribing exploit, but which I've spelled scribing, but it does use that exploit as well, so of course be aware of that. But the amount of things that this build gives you and the amount of stuff you can access, and you can do it every turn, what you do turn to turn changes both in different combats and across every level that you build the character up. Collecting scrolls is fun and gives you the sense of accomplishment and building up your character and finding new and powerful things, especially with the secret spells that are available in Baldur's Gate as well. So it just gives you access to all of the cool ways to affect the game, build power, and have more fun. I love this character and can't recommend it enough. Alright, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the 10 most fun characters that I've played in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, obviously, of course, I am missing hundreds of characters that are extremely fun, and, if I made this list on a different day, I'm sure it would look completely different, because these things are so subjective, and overall the game is just so much fun that playing one of these specific characters is not necessary to have the most fun possible. But hopefully this gives you an idea for some of the characters that I've enjoyed the most, that you might enjoy the most, or ways to build characters that you might find more fun, whether you're a new player or a veteran coming back to the game for the millionth time. As always, of course, also definitely let me know builds that you think are really fun that I didn't mention here. Post your favorite builds in the comments below. Other people can look for those as well and might find something that they would enjoy. As always, of course, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to leave any comment, of course, not just a build, but any comment helps. And hit like, that's great for the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Also, if you can hype the video, YouTube has just added that. I still have no idea what it does, but it can't hurt to push buttons, so I appreciate you doing that as well. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends, happy holidays if you're celebrating around this time, and I will catch you next time.